In this video, I want to show you how to replace your water pump on this 5.4 liter F-150. It's located right behind the fan blade. That's where the fan is attached, right there. So let's get started. Now, you don't have to remove the wheel. I did only for camera purposes, but if you come through the passenger side wheel well, you can see the radiator petcock right here. Take a 19mm socket. I built myself out of some aluminum foil, a little shield right here so that the coolant, instead of it shooting straight out on the frame, it can follow down and fall into my collection bucket. Take a 19mm socket, put it on the drain plug and unscrew it. It should not be too tight. If it is, try to work it gently. You don't want it to break. And unscrew it until coolant starts coming out. Don't take this out though, because if you do, it'll start shooting backwards. And now we'll just let this drain. In order to speed up the process, let's go remove the radiator cap. There actually is no radiator cap. It's just an overflow cap. This is what holds pressure on the system. So we'll just unthread this. Air will go in as coolant tries to go out. I need to get this cover out of the way, and in order to do that, I have to get the spare tire tool / jack handle out of the way. So just unclip it from its retainers and set it aside. And now we can just go along and undo all the push clips that hold this down. I don't have any of my original push clips anymore. These are all aftermarket push clips that someone has put in. So whatever yours are, just go ahead and remove them in whatever way they need to be removed. With all the push clips removed, don't forget there are two over here. Lift this up and slide it out of the way. Let's get this air intake out of here. Lift up on this. Underneath, you'll see the wire. Follow it and unplug the mass airflow sensor. There we go. And I'm trying to remove this whole unit, so I'm just going to unbolt the clamp on the throttle body and take this out as one whole assembly. There is another connector over here. Unplug that. And to actually get to the throttle body, I need to remove this cover, 3 8mm bolts. Remove these two hoses, and then unscrew this clamp with an 8mm socket. Now you can wiggle this whole assembly, pull it right off the throttle body, pick it up and set it aside. With a pair of pliers, remove this upper radiator hose clamp. And then you can break the hose free off the radiator. Sometimes it needs to be persuaded a little bit, so very gently with the pliers, break it free. Now you can slide it off. Since the coolant has mostly drained, there shouldn't be any in this hose, which there isn't. That's perfect. On the driver's side, there is the overflow hose. Remove the clamp, break the hose free very gently, and remove the hose. Now I will be removing this overflow tank only for visual purposes. You don't have to remove it, but otherwise there's no way I can get the camera in here to show you how to remove these lines, the transmission lines. So I like to get a better angle for you. Again, you do not have to remove this. Okay, here we go. Now you can see a lot better. This is what's holding the line on here, this plastic clip. So remove it. Just pry on the two little tabs. At this point, you want to spray some rust penetrant here to lubricate the line, but also clear out any debris. And then you need one of these tools that is specifically made for these lines here. Find the right size, slide it over, and press it in. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch any fluid that might come out. Okay, yep. Once it goes in all the way and it bottoms out, go ahead and pull on the line. There we go. Take the line out, get your tool off, and then we'll do the same thing to the lower line, which is straight down. And with the line out of the way, you can remove this 8mm bolt that holds on the fan shroud. There's one on this side and then one on the other side, so do both. Next, you need a fan clutch removal tool, which looks like this. It's basically a giant wrench that goes on the end of your air hammer, and you use this to break free the fan clutch from the pulley here. And you want to do this before the belt is off. That way it can be held in place as much as possible. So situate your tool, and you want to spin it counterclockwise. This is a regular thread, it's not reverse thread. That's it, it broke free. Sometimes it takes a lot more than this, but at this point you can spin it and it should come off of the pulley. Make sure you don't drop it though, so be careful as you do this. Okay, there we go. Now you can pull the shroud and fan up at the same time. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and close my petcock so that it can stop dripping. Nice and snug, but not too tight. It's just plastic. Next, I want to remove the 4 10mm bolts that hold on the water pump pulley to the water pump. Do this while the belt is still on. That way it can be held tightly, otherwise it's just going to want to spin on you. I am using an air ratchet, which will work to my advantage because although it's not an air impact, it will have some force to break these free. If you don't have one of these and you have to do it by hand, I suggest trying to hold this with your hand or put a little bit of extra tension on the belt tensioner to tighten this up. Whatever works for you, but you have to get these 4 broken free. Don't remove them all the way because the pulley will just fly off at this point with the tension of the belt, but loosen them up. Okay, that doesn't work. Luckily for me, I have this tool right here, which is a 3/8 impact. Again, if you don't have it, try to do something else, but what you saw is what most likely is going to happen. These are all broken free. Let's get the belt off. This right here is the tensioner. As you can see, it has a 1/2" drive in the head of it, right where the pulley sits. So I'm going to put my 1/2" ratchet in there with a small extension. I'm using a long breaker bar because this tensioner is pretty stiff. Go ahead and remove the belt off of anything. Whatever you can reach, let go of the tensioner and remove your tool. And now we can remove the belt. Take a note of how it's routed. I'm going to show you in the video once it's time to reinstall it, but it's always a good idea to take a picture if you don't have the diagram. Finish removing the water pump pulley. Sometimes these are stuck on here, so grab a little rubber mallet and bonk it. That should break it free. There it is. I have a collection bucket underneath, and now I'm going to take out all the bolts that hold on the water pump. I'm going to start at the top and end at the bottom. I'm going to leave this one in, just a few threads so it holds the water pump on. Okay, finally. Take that last bolt out, and this is why we were fighting it. The water pump was corroded in there, and you know, the surface doesn't look too pretty, but it's not the worst, so we'll clean that up. Now I want to clean this area inside here before I put the new water pump on, and I'm gonna go in with a wire wheel and very, very gently kind of scuff up the surface. I just want to remove some of this corrosion. It's pretty severe, although it could be worse, but it's pretty bad, and I don't think that this will seal up perfectly in this condition. So that's what I choose to do. If you want, you can do it by hand with some sandpaper, or if it's clean enough, you just don't even have to do anything. But you do want to clean it up if it is corroded. Now take the new water pump, make sure the gasket is seated on here, this O-ring, and it's going to seal up nicely. As you can see from the bolt pattern, it can only go on one way. If you wanted to, you could put a little bit of coolant on that O-ring to lubricate it, or whatever else you prefer. Make sure that when you slide it in, the O-ring doesn't roll over and pop out of its groove. You're gonna have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit. You do want to seat it by hand. You don't want to just suck it in with the mounting bolts. There we go. Because sometimes when you pull it in with the mounting bolts, it can actually rip that O-ring and you won't even know it until it doesn't seal anymore. So now let's start these bolts in by hand. We'll snug them up and torque them down. Oops, it popped out. So I guess I'll have to do that again. But at least if these are started, it'll slide in straight. All right, let's bottom these out. Going in a cross pattern just so I can fully seat this water pump. The torque for this is 18 foot-pounds, and I'm going to do the same thing, go in a cross pattern to make sure that it is fully seated. Next, I'm going to put on the pulley. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to take off this rubber piece here, which protects the threads during shipping. And this is where the fan clutch will bolt on. But obviously, we need the threads, so I'm just going to use a pick this little rubber piece off of here. And now, with that off, I'm going to slide in my fan pulley, the water pump pulley, I guess. Line up the bolt holes. Let's bottom these out. The torque is also 18 foot-pounds for these, but obviously this is just going to spin. I'm going to try and torque it, but if you can't, or if, well, I can't, I'm just going to snug it up with my impact. Just make it snug. I'm also going to go in a cross pattern for this one. To torque this, I'm going to use a little pry bar just to try to hold this pulley from spinning. It's time to put the serpentine belt back, and to do that, I'm going to show you a diagram on the screen. That way it's going to be a lot easier for you to figure out how it goes, other than just looking at the video. But basically, I'm going to start around the crankshaft here, around the harmonic balancer. From here, I mean, the sequence doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of preference. I'm just going to go around clockwise, follow the belt clockwise, making sure that it is on the right pulleys, on the splines and everything. So from here, I'm going to go up and around the water pump, then down and underneath the power steering. Then from the power steering, it goes all the way up over the alternator, and then you have to squeeze it through. Oh, here we go. This is what happens when you have a new belt. And then from here, you actually have to squeeze it in between the tensioner and the idler so it can reach down to the AC, kind of like this, and you fish it down here. I'm trying to hold tension on it at the same time. All right, so this is it right here. You just have to put a 1/2-inch breaker bar in the tensioner, release tension, and then slip it onto the AC compressor. Or actually, if I take it off the alternator here, I might be able to get this on the AC easier, and then I'll have an easier time putting it on the alternator as opposed to the AC compressor all the way down there. And popped off again. So let's get this breaker bar, push down on this to release tension, slide it up on here, and remove the breaker. Well, don't remove the breaker bar yet. What you want to do is, with it still on, make sure that the belt is positioned properly on all of the pulleys. The ribbed ones, make sure that it's sitting in all the ribs, otherwise the grooves will cut through the belt as it's riding on sideways, crooked. Everything seems perfect, so now you can remove the breaker bar. And when we first start the vehicle, I'm going to shut it off after a few seconds and double check the belt to make sure that it is properly routed, because like I said, if it's not 100% seated, it will jump off and create all sorts of damage. So now when it comes time to putting on the fan, you have to put it in together with the fan shroud. So drop these two in. Watch out for your radiator fins. You don't want to damage anything. Try to position the fan shroud so that it's as lined up as it can be with the radiator, with its mounting points. At this point, I'm going to try to thread on this fan onto the water pump so that it actually holds itself on, because it is heavy to hold at this angle. Okay, there we go. Getting it to catch onto the first thread is always the most difficult part, but once it does, you can just spin it and it should easily go on. And now it's bottomed out, and we need to tighten it up, for which we can use our special fan clutch tool. Set up the tool and tighten it up. The water pump started spinning, so I know it's tight. On the side here, make sure the fan shroud goes down into this hook on the radiator, on both sides that is. Mine did, perfect. Now you can put in the transmission lines, make sure that it snaps into place like that. Give it a tug to make sure it doesn't pop back out. Bring in the safety lock and lock it over like that. Now let's bolt up the fan shroud. put in the two little 8mm headed bolts that held this on. There's one on each side. Let's get the upper radiator hose in, bottom it out, put the clamp back on. Now bring in this cover here at the front, line it up, and let's put in all the push clips that hold this on. And don't forget to put back the spare tire tool. And lastly, the air filter housing with the rest of the intake here. Slide that over the throttle body, just like this. You have two hoses that went in here. Let's tighten up this clamp. Make sure this is pushed on all the way when you tighten the clamp. Nice and snug. These hoses are in. There's a wire here. Reconnect the sensor here. And on this side you have the mass airflow sensor. Reconnect that. Make sure it clicks. Secure the harness and secure the air filter housing. Now it's time to fill up the cooling system. What I have set up here is a spill-proof funnel, which also helps bleed the system. Because this is now the highest point in the cooling system, naturally the air will want to rise up into my funnel and not get trapped in the system. The only downside with doing this on this type of system is this overflow tank is also the filler, and it's not supposed to be full. If you fill this all the way up, you are way over full, and it's going to start spilling out once it warms up. So once you do fill this all the way up, if you choose to raise it up into the funnel, you want to make sure you drain some afterwards, either with a turkey baster or fluid extraction syringe, whatever you have, or just drain it out the radiator just a little bit. But there's a mark, which I'll show you in a second, and you don't want to be above that mark, otherwise you're over full. So what I'm going to do here is just put in a little bit. Looks like this wasn't tight all the way. Make sure this is tight if you use this type of funnel, otherwise it'll leak out here as you do this. So now let's go ahead and put in the appropriate amount of coolant. It'll take about 2 gallons, maybe 2.5, depending on how much you drained. And if you don't know what kind of coolant to use, refer to your owner's manual and make sure you use the appropriate type. If you look closely, you can see right there, it says cold fill on the reservoir. That's exactly where you want to fill it up to. If you put a flashlight in either in the tank or to the side of it, you'll see the coolant line, the level, and just make sure you don't go past it unless you are actively trying to bleed it in your funnel here. So I actually filled mine right up to that fill mark. So now let me run you through the bleeding procedure. First, you want to wait for it to naturally stop bubbling. If it's still bubbling, just give it a minute. Wait for it to stop getting air out of the system. And once it has done that, let's jump inside and fire it up. All right, now with the key in the ignition, let's fire it up. Starts right up. That's perfect. Now, once it's turned on, let's turn on some heat here. So turn on the blower. Make sure the AC is off. Turn the heat all the way up. I have this digital display. If you have the analog one with the knobs, just turn it all the way up. You want the coolant circulating through that heater core, and I'm gonna set it to vent. That way I can feel when the air blows warm over here. So I'm just gonna give it a minute and then wait for the air to blow over here. While it's warming up, pay attention to this temperature gauge and make sure it doesn't go above the halfway mark. Right now it's still cold, I just turned it on, but once it reaches full operating temperature, shut it off and obviously make sure you have heat through the vents.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.